The dust swirled through the abandoned streets of Fallujah like ghosts carrying whispers of death. Staff Sergeant Elena Rodriguez crouched behind a crumbling concrete wall, her M40A3 sniper rifle steady against her shoulder as she scanned the maze of buildings through her scope. The city had become a graveyard of twisted metal and shattered dreams, where every shadow could hide an enemy and every silence could precede violence. 3 months into her deployment, Elena had already earned a reputation among the Marines as someone who could see what others missed. Her fellow soldiers called her Eagle Eye, but today felt different. The intelligence report spoke of something that made even the most seasoned warriors nervous. 12 snipers, they said, operating in perfect coordination throughout the city. Invisible killers who had already claimed the lives of 14 Marines and countless Iraqi civilians. The morning briefing had been grim. Captain Morrison, a man whose face bore the weight of too many lost soldiers, stood before the assembled unit with maps scattered across a makeshift table. His weathered hands traced the locations where their people had fallen, each mark representing a life cut short by an unseen enemy. The pattern was clear to anyone who understood warfare. These weren't random attacks or opportunistic shots. This was systematic, calculated, and terrifyingly effective. Elena listened as Morrison explained how conventional tactics had failed. Patrols had been ambushed, convoys had been picked apart, and even their most experienced snipers had been unable to locate the enemy positions. The insurgents seemed to materialize from nowhere, take their shots, and vanish like smoke. Some of the Marines whispered about supernatural abilities, while others spoke of advanced training that surpassed anything they had encountered before. What troubled Elena most wasn't the skill of these enemy snipers, but the psychological warfare they were waging. Fear had begun to creep into the ranks, transforming confident Marines into nervous shadows of themselves. Men who had once moved through dangerous territory with calculated boldness now hesitated at every corner, jumped at every sound, and questioned every decision. The invisible enemy was winning not just through violence, but through terror. As the briefing concluded, Elena found herself volunteering for what many considered suicide mission. While others had failed to track these phantom snipers, she believed her unique approach to observation and patient hunting might succeed where brute force had failed. Captain Morrison looked at her for a long moment, weighing the risks against the desperate need for results. Finally, he nodded, knowing that conventional methods had already proven inadequate. Elena spent the rest of that day preparing for what she understood would be the most challenging hunt of her military career. She studied aerial photographs until her eyes burned, memorizing every building, every alley, every potential hiding spot in her assigned sector. She cleaned and rechecked her rifle until every component operated with perfect precision. Most importantly, she prepared her mind for the kind of patience and focus that separated amateur marksmen from true snipers. Her background had prepared her for this moment in ways that even she didn't fully understand. Growing up in rural Montana, Elena had learned to hunt from her grandfather, a World War II veteran who understood that successful hunting required more than good aim. He had taught her to read the landscape, to understand wind patterns, to think like her prey, and to wait for the perfect moment even when every instinct screamed for immediate action. Those lessons had served her well during sniper training at Camp Pendleton, where instructors quickly recognized her natural ability to remain motionless for hours while maintaining complete awareness of her surroundings. While other trainees struggled with the mental discipline required for long-range precision shooting, Elena seemed to enter a meditative state that enhanced rather than dulled her senses. Now, as darkness approached and she prepared for her first night of hunting, Elena understood that everything she had learned was leading to this confrontation. Somewhere in this urban wasteland, 12 highly trained killers were waiting to add more names to their deadly tally. They had the advantage of familiarity with the terrain, knowledge of Marine patrol patterns, and the confidence that came from months of successful operations. But Elena possessed something they might not expect. She had the ability to think beyond conventional sniper tactics, to see patterns where others saw chaos, and to remain calm under pressure that had broken stronger warriors. As she moved through the rubble-strewn streets toward her first observation position, she carried with her not just weapons and equipment, but the accumulated wisdom of every teacher, every training exercise, and every moment of preparation that had shaped her into the Marine she had become. The hunt was about to begin, and Elena Rodriguez was ready to prove that sometimes the most dangerous predator is the one nobody sees coming. The first position she had chosen was a partially collapsed apartment building that offered clear sight lines across three major intersections where previous attacks had occurred. As she climbed through the debris-filled stairwell, Elena moved with the careful precision of someone who understood that a single misplaced step could bring the entire structure down around her. The building groaned and shifted with each movement, but she had learned to work with damaged structures rather than fight against them. Reaching the fourth floor, Elena found a room where the exterior wall had been blown away, creating a natural hide that would allow her to observe without being silhouetted against the sky. She arranged her equipment with methodical care, creating multiple firing positions within the space, so she could shift locations without major repositioning. Her rifle was positioned to cover the primary field of view, while backup positions offered different angles should the situation change. As the sun set and darkness claimed the city, Elena began the waiting game that every sniper knows intimately. Hours passed without movement, broken only by the distant sounds of patrols and the occasional crack of gunfire from other sectors. She had learned to use this time productively, cataloging every detail of the terrain, noting wind direction changes, and building a mental map of potential enemy positions based on the geometry of previous attacks. It was during the deepest part of the night, when most people surrender to fatigue and lose their edge, that Elena noticed something others had missed. In three separate buildings across her field of view, she observed brief flashes of light that appeared to be random, but occurred in a pattern that suggested communication. The lights were too quick and too precise to be accidental, but too subtle to attract attention from casual observers. This discovery confirmed her suspicion that the enemy snipers were working as a coordinated team rather than independent operators. The implications were significant because it meant they could provide mutual support, coordinate attacks, and share intelligence about Marine movements. It also meant that taking down one member of the team might alert the others and compromise any chance of eliminating the entire network. As dawn approached, Elena had gathered more intelligence about enemy operations than any previous reconnaissance mission. She had identified at least 4 potential sniper positions, documented the communication system they were using, and begun to understand the tactical doctrine that made them so effective. More importantly, she had done all of this without being detected herself, proving that patience and careful observation could succeed where aggressive tactics had failed. But as she prepared to return to base for debriefing, Elena realized that the real challenge still lay ahead. Gathering intelligence was only the first step in what would become an increasingly dangerous game of cat and mouse. The enemy snipers had survived this long because they were skilled, disciplined, and ruthless. Taking them down would require her to become all of those things and more. The sun rose over Fallujah like a red eye opening to survey the damage wrought during the night. Elena packed her equipment with the same care she had used to deploy it, leaving no trace of her presence in the damaged building. As she made her way back through the rubble-filled streets, she carried with her the first pieces of a puzzle that would ultimately determine whether the Marines could reclaim control of their sector or continue to lose ground to an enemy that seemed to hold all the advantages. The hunt had beta debriefing room felt like a pressure cooker as Elena spread her hand-drawn maps and observation notes across the scarred wooden table. Captain Morrison leaned forward, studying the intelligence she had gathered with the intensity of a man whose life depended on understanding every detail. Around the table, other Marines who had attempted similar reconnaissance missions watched with a mixture of skepticism and hope. wondering if Elena had truly discovered something they had missed or if she was seeing patterns where none existed. Elena pointed to the buildings where she had observed the coordinated light signals, explaining how the timing and sequence suggested a sophisticated communication network. She described how the enemy snipers appeared to be using a rotation system that kept fresh shooters in position while others rested or relocated. Most importantly, she had identified what appeared to be a command position that coordinated the activities of the other teams. The room fell silent as the implications of her discoveries became clear. If Elena was correct, then the 12 snipers weren't just skilled individual operators, but part of a military unit with training and discipline that rivaled their own. This explained why conventional counter-sniper tactics had failed and why the enemy had been able to maintain pressure across such a wide area for so long. Captain Morrison studied the maps for several minutes before speaking. His questions were precise and challenging, testing Elena's observations against what they knew about enemy capabilities and previous attack patterns. Gradually, as her answers proved consistent and logical, the skepticism in the room transformed into something approaching excitement. For the first time in weeks, they had actionable intelligence about an enemy that had seemed untouchable. But intelligence alone wouldn't solve their problem. Elena's reconnaissance had revealed the scope and sophistication of what they were facing, which in some ways made their situation seem even more daunting. Taking down 12 highly trained snipers who were working in coordination would require tactics that went far beyond conventional counter-sniper operations. It would require thinking like the enemy while staying one step ahead of their planning. Elena volunteered to continue her reconnaissance missions, but with a different objective. Instead of simply observing, she wanted to begin systematically targeting the communication network that held the enemy team together. If she could disrupt their ability to coordinate, they might make mistakes that would reveal their positions or create opportunities for the Marines to regain the initiative. The plan she proposed was risky to the point of being nearly suicidal. She would position herself close enough to the enemy snipers to interfere with their operations while gathering detailed intelligence about their methods. This meant working alone in territory that the enemy controlled, with backup too far away to provide immediate assistance if things went wrong. It meant becoming a predator, hunting other predators who had every advantage except the element of surprise. Morrison approved the mission with obvious reluctance, understanding that they had few alternatives left to explore. Conventional operations had failed, superior firepower had proven ineffective, and time was running out before higher command would demand results that might come at an unacceptable cost in Marine lives. Elena's approach offered their best chance of turning the tide, even though it placed enormous responsibility on the shoulders of a single Marine. Over the next 3 days, Elena prepared for operations that would push her skills and equipment to their absolute limits. She modified her gear for maximum stealth and mobility, stripping away anything that wasn't essential for survival and mission success. Her rifle was equipped with specialized ammunition designed for precision at extreme ranges, while her optics were configured for both daylight and night operations. More importantly, she prepared mentally for what she knew would be a psychological battle as much as a physical one. The enemy snipers had maintained their edge through months of successful operations that had given them confidence and momentum. Elena would need to reverse that psychological advantage by demonstrating that they were no longer the hunters but had become the hunted. Her first target was the communication network she had identified during her initial reconnaissance. Rather than attempting to eliminate the enemy snipers directly, Elena planned to disrupt their ability to coordinate by taking out the relay positions they used for sending signals. This would force them to expose themselves while trying to re-establish communication or operate without the coordination that made them so effective. The night she began this new phase of operations, Elena moved through the city like a ghost seeking other spirits. She had memorized every route, every hiding place, and every potential escape path in her area of operations. Her movements were timed to avoid Marine patrols while taking advantage of the gaps in enemy observation that she had identified during her reconnaissance. The first communication relay was positioned in a minaret that offered commanding views across the city center. Elena approached the building from a direction that would keep her hidden from other enemy positions while still allowing her to get within effective range. The shot would need to be precise enough to destroy the communication equipment without causing structural damage that might harm civilians sheltering in the building below. As she settled into position and began her final preparations, Elena felt the familiar calm that came with absolute focus. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadied, and her vision seemed to sharpen until every detail of the target area became crystal clear. This was the moment when months of training and preparation crystallized into a single perfect instant of execution. The shot was taken during a brief lull in the wind, when atmospheric conditions were optimal for extreme accuracy. Through her scope, Elena watched the communication equipment disintegrate in a shower of sparks and debris. The effect was immediate and visible across the enemy network as other positions began signaling frantically, trying to re-establish contact with the destroyed relay. But Elena was already moving toward her next position, knowing that the enemy would respond quickly to investigate the destroyed equipment. Her second target was a backup communication position in a water tower that served as an alternate relay for the primary network. This shot would be more challenging because it required her to engage from a greater distance while the enemy was already on alert. The approach to the second firing position took her through a section of the city that had been heavily damaged by previous fighting. Buildings that had once housed families and businesses now stood like broken teeth against the skyline, their shattered walls and collapsed roofs creating a maze of obstacles and concealment. Elena moved through this urban wasteland with practiced efficiency, using the destruction to mask her movement while maintaining awareness of potential threats. As she prepared for the second shot, Elena noticed increased activity in the enemy position she had identified. Figures moved between buildings with obvious urgency, and she could see flashes of light as they attempted to coordinate their response using backup communication methods. The enemy was reacting exactly as she had hoped, exposing themselves in ways they had avoided during months of careful operations. The second shot was more complex because the target was partially concealed behind the water tower's structural supports. Elena had to calculate not just wind and distance, but also the trajectory needed to thread her bullet between steel beams while maintaining enough energy to destroy the equipment on the far side. It was the kind of shot that separated exceptional marksmen from merely competent ones. When a shot was fired, Elena knew immediately that it had found its mark. The backup communication position erupted in a cascade of electrical failures that sent sparks cascading down the water tower like a metal waterfall. Across her field of view, enemy positions began showing signs of confusion and disorganization as their carefully planned coordination network collapsed. But Elena's success came with an immediate cost. The enemy snipers might not be able to communicate effectively, but they could still think and adapt to changing circumstances. Within minutes of her second successful shot, Elena observed enemy teams beginning to move in patterns that suggested they were attempting to locate and eliminate the threat she represented. The hunter had become the hunted, but Elena was ready for this development. She had planned her operations knowing that eventual detection was inevitable, and she had prepared multiple escape routes and fallback positions for exactly this situation. As enemy teams began converging on her general area, Elena initiated the next phase of her mission. Instead of attempting to evade contact, she began leading the enemy snipers into areas where their superior numbers would become a disadvantage rather than an asset. The urban terrain that had provided them with excellent hiding places could also become a trap for teams that were forced to move without proper reconnaissance and coordination. Elena's movement through the city became a deadly game of chess played at lightning speed. Each position she chose served multiple purposes offering concealment from enemy observation while providing fields of fire that would allow her to engage targets of opportunity. She was no longer just hunting the enemy snipers. She was manipulating them into making the kinds of mistakes that would allow her to begin eliminating them systematically. As the night progressed, the character of the conflict began to change. The enemy snipers who had maintained the initiative for months suddenly found themselves reacting to threats instead of creating them. Their careful discipline began to crack under the pressure of operating without coordination while trying to locate an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move. Elena sensed this shift in momentum like a predator detecting weakness in prey. The enemy was still dangerous and skilled, but they were no longer operating from a position of complete advantage. For the first time since the siege began, the Marines had a chance to turn the tide through the actions of a single determined warrior who refused to accept that any enemy was truly invisible. Gun in earnest. And Elena Rodriguez was starting to understand exactly what kind of predator she was facing. The dawnlight revealed a city transformed by the events of the previous night. Where once the enemy snipers had moved with the confidence of apex predators, now there was hesitation and uncertainty in their patterns. Elena observed this change from her new hide site, a partially collapsed parking garage that offered commanding views of 3 major sectors, while providing multiple escape routes should the situation deteriorate. Through her scope, she could see enemy teams attempting to re-establish their communication network using methods that exposed them to observation and potential attack. Their movements lacked the smooth coordination that had made them so effective, and their positioning showed signs of improvisation rather than careful planning. The destruction of their communication relays had achieved more than Elena had hoped, creating opportunities that hadn't existed just hours before. But Elena knew that disrupting enemy communications was only the beginning of her mission. The 12 snipers remained dangerous and skilled, and they would adapt to their new circumstances quickly if given the chance. She needed to capitalize on their temporary disadvantage before they could establish new procedures and regain their tactical edge. Her first opportunity came as she watched an enemy sniper team attempting to establish a new communication position in a bell tower that dominated the central district. The team consisted of 2 men, one carrying communication equipment, while the other provided security with a high-powered rifle. They moved with obvious urgency, understanding that re-establishing coordination was critical to their survival. Elena studied their approach route and identified the moment when they would be most vulnerable to attack. As they climbed the narrow staircase within the bell tower, there would be a brief period when the security man would be focused on the stairs below, while the communication specialist would be distracted by his equipment setup. It would be a narrow window of opportunity, but Elena had built her reputation on exploiting exactly such moments. The shot would need to be taken at extreme range through a small window opening, requiring Elena to compensate for wind drift, elevation changes, and the movement of her target. She spent several minutes calculating the ballistics and timing, knowing that she would have only one chance before the enemy team completed their setup and became much more difficult targets. When a moment came, Elena's shot was flawless. The bullet struck the communication specialist just as he was connecting his equipment, sending him tumbling from the bell tower in a cascade of sparks and debris. The security man spun toward the window, searching desperately for the source of the shot, but Elena was already shifting to a backup position within her hide site. The reaction from other enemy positions was immediate and revealing. Teams that had been attempting to coordinate their movements suddenly found themselves completely isolated, forced to operate independently without any means of sharing intelligence or requesting support. Elena watched as their careful discipline began to crumble under the pressure of operating blind in hostile territory. More importantly, the death of the communication specialist had a psychological impact that went beyond the loss of equipment and coordination. For months, these snipers had operated with impunity, striking at will and disappearing before any effective response could be mounted. Now, for the first time, One of their own had been eliminated by an enemy they couldn't see and couldn't counter. Elena used this psychological advantage to begin systematically hunting the remaining enemy teams. She had identified their general positions during her reconnaissance, and their attempts to re-establish communication had revealed more specific locations. Without coordination, they were forced to operate in predictable patterns that made them vulnerable to someone who understood their tactical doctrine. Her second target was a sniper team that had been responsible for several attacks on Marine convoys traveling through the Eastern District. Elena had observed their hide site during her initial reconnaissance and noted that they had established multiple firing positions within a single building, allowing them to engage targets from different angles while maintaining concealment. The approach to this target required Elena to cross nearly a mile of hostile territory while avoiding detection by other enemy teams that were now actively hunting for her. She moved during the heat of the day when most snipers would be resting, using the harsh sunlight and thermal distortion to mask her movement between concealment positions. The building housing the enemy sniper team was a former office complex that had been gutted by previous fighting but retained enough structure to provide excellent fields of fire. Elena positioned herself in an adjacent building where she could observe the enemy hide site while remaining concealed from other potential threats. The waiting game that followed tested every aspect of her training and patience. Hours passed without any sign of activity from the enemy position. Elena began to wonder if the team had relocated or if her intelligence had been incorrect. But as the afternoon heat began to fade and shadows started to lengthen, she detected movement in a third-floor window that had been carefully camouflaged to blend with the surrounding debris. The enemy sniper was taking up position for what appeared to be a planned attack, probably timed to coincide with the evening patrol schedule that the insurgents had learned to anticipate. Elena watched as he settled into his firing position and began scanning for targets, completely unaware that he had become the hunted rather than the hunter. Elena's shot took the enemy sniper while he was focused on acquiring his own target. The bullet struck with devastating effect, eliminating one of the most dangerous threats to Marine operations in the Eastern District. But Elena's success came with immediate consequences as the dead sniper's spotter began frantically searching for the source of the shot. The spotter was well-trained and disciplined, immediately implementing counter-sniper procedures that would make him a difficult target. He used concealment effectively while attempting to locate Elena's position, and she could see that he was communicating with other enemy positions using hand signals visible from multiple locations. This was exactly the kind of situation Elena had trained for during her advanced sniper courses. The enemy spotter possessed skills and equipment comparable to her own, and he had the advantage of fighting on familiar terrain with potential support from other teams. Elena would need to use every aspect of her training and experience to eliminate this threat before he could coordinate an effective response. The duel that followed was a masterclass in precision shooting and tactical patience. Both snipers used every available piece of cover and concealment while attempting to gain the positional advantage needed for a decisive shot. Elena changed positions 3 times within her hide site, each movement calculated to present different angles while maintaining concealment from observation. The enemy spotter proved to be exceptionally skilled, anticipating several of Elena's moves and forcing her to abandon advantageous positions when his return fire came uncomfortably close to her location. For nearly an hour, the two snipers maneuvered for advantage like chess masters playing a game where a single mistake would be fatal. Elena's opportunity came when the enemy spotter made a tactical error driven by frustration and time pressure. In his eagerness to gain a clear shot, he exposed slightly more of his position than was tactically sound. Elena's shot was instantaneous and final, eliminating the second member of the team and securing the Eastern District for Marine operations. But even as she celebrated this tactical victory, Elena was aware that her success was creating new challenges. The enemy teams were beginning to understand that they faced a threat unlike anything they had encountered before. Their responses were becoming more sophisticated and coordinated, suggesting that they were adapting their tactics to counter her specific capabilities. Radio intercepts translated by Marine intelligence indicated that the remaining enemy snipers were implementing new security procedures and attempting to identify the Marine who had eliminated 3 of their number. They were offering significant rewards for information about her identity and location, and they were beginning to coordinate their movements in ways that suggested they were planning a systematic search of her known operating areas. Elena realized that she was approaching a critical decision point in her mission. She had successfully disrupted enemy communications, eliminated 3 skilled snipers, and demonstrated that the insurgent teams were not invulnerable. But the remaining 9 snipers were now fully aware of her presence and were adapting their tactics accordingly. Continuing her solo operations would become increasingly dangerous as the enemy focused their resources on eliminating the threat she represented. However, Elena also understood that this moment represented the best opportunity the Marines would have to eliminate the entire enemy sniper network. The insurgents were off balance and reactive rather than proactive. Their communication network was disrupted, their confidence was shaken, and they were making tactical decisions based on fear rather than careful planning. As night fell over Fallujah, Elena prepared for what she knew would be the most dangerous phase of her mission. The remaining enemy snipers were no longer just hunting Marines. They were hunting her specifically. The conflict had become personal in a way that would determine not just tactical success or failure, but survival itself. The city held its breath as 2 forces of highly trained killers prepared for a confrontation that would determine control over one of the most contested areas of the war. Elena Rodriguez, the Marine sniper who had already exceeded every expectation, was about to face the ultimate test of her skills, courage, and determination. The intelligence briefing that reached Elena through encrypted radio communication changed everything she thought she knew about her mission. Marine reconnaissance teams had intercepted communications indicating that the remaining 9 enemy snipers had received reinforcements and were implementing a coordinated plan to eliminate the threat she represented. What had begun as a counter-sniper operation had evolved into a deadly game where Elena had become the primary target of an enemy that now understood exactly what kind of adversary they were facing. The intercepted communications revealed details that made Elena's blood run cold. The enemy had identified her general operating area and had begun establishing overlapping fields of fire that would make movement between positions extremely dangerous. They had also brought in specialists with advanced counter-sniper training, transforming what had been a disrupted and reactive enemy into a focused hunting party with a single objective. More disturbing was the intelligence suggesting that the enemy snipers had been studying recorded footage of areas where Elena had operated, analyzing her tactics, and trying to predict her future movements. They had identified patterns in her positioning and timing that could be exploited if they could force her into situations where those patterns became predictable. Elena realized that her previous successes had come at the cost of revealing information about her methods and capabilities. Each engagement had provided the enemy with data about her equipment, training, and tactical preferences. Now they were using that information to construct what amounted to an elaborate trap designed specifically for her. But Elena had advantages that the enemy intelligence couldn't fully account for. Her training had emphasized adaptability and unconventional thinking, precisely because conventional sniper tactics become predictable when used repeatedly against sophisticated opponents. She had been preparing for exactly this kind of situation throughout her career, understanding that successful snipers must be able to evolve their methods constantly. The tactical situation required Elena to abandon many of the techniques that had served her well during the first phase of her mission. Instead of relying on concealment and patience, she would need to use mobility and misdirection to stay ahead of an enemy that was now specifically configured to counter her known capabilities. This meant operating in ways that violated conventional sniper doctrine, but might be the only approach that could succeed against opponents who understood conventional methods. Elena's new strategy centered on psychological warfare, rather than simple elimination of targets. Instead of attempting to kill the remaining enemy snipers through direct engagement, she would create conditions that forced them to make mistakes that would expose them to elimination by supporting Marine units. This required her to accept greater personal risk while operating in ways that would appear to be tactical errors to any observer who didn't understand her true objectives. The first phase of this new approach involved Elena deliberately exposing herself to enemy observation in ways that would appear to be mistakes caused by overconfidence or fatigue. She allowed enemy spotters to detect her movement between positions, but only after ensuring that any shots they could take would miss their targets due to range, angle, or environmental factors she had calculated in advance. These apparent mistakes had the desired psychological effect on the enemy snipers. After days of being unable to locate their primary target, they suddenly found multiple opportunities to observe and potentially engage her. The relief and excitement this created caused several enemy teams to abandon their carefully planned positions in favor of more aggressive tactics that brought them closer to Elena's actual location. Elena used their aggressive repositioning to begin the most dangerous phase of her mission. As enemy teams moved closer to what they believed were advantageous positions, she began systematically eliminating them using techniques that relied more on surprise and close-range engagement than a long-distance precision shooting that had characterized her earlier operations. Her fourth kill came during a night engagement that brought her within 50 meters of an enemy sniper team that had been attempting to establish an ambush position along one of her predicted movement routes. Elena had detected their approach hours earlier and had been waiting in a position that allowed her to engage them from an unexpected angle when they committed to their final positioning. The close-range engagement was over in seconds, but it demonstrated Elena's versatility and adaptability in ways that terrified the remaining enemy snipers. They had expected to face a conventional long-range marksman who could be countered using established anti-sniper tactics. Instead, they found themselves facing an opponent who seemed comfortable and deadly at any range and in any tactical situation. The psychological impact of this engagement extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Enemy radio communications intercepted after the incident revealed growing fear and uncertainty among the surviving snipers. They had lost another team member to an opponent who seemed to anticipate their every move while remaining completely unpredictable in her own actions. Elena's fifth and sixth kills came during a single engagement that showcased the effectiveness of her new tactical approach. Two enemy sniper teams had attempted to coordinate a pincer movement that would trap her in a confined area with limited escape routes. They had planned their approach carefully, using intelligence about her previous movements to predict where she would be positioned when their trap closed. But Elena had anticipated exactly this kind of coordinated attack and had prepared countermeasures that turned the enemy's tactical sophistication against them. Instead of being in the position where they expected to find her, she had established a hide site that allowed her to observe their approach while remaining completely concealed from their planned fields of fire. As the two enemy teams moved into position for their coordinated attack, they exposed themselves to angles that Elena had prepared specifically for this contingency. Her shots eliminated both team leaders within seconds of each other, creating chaos and confusion that allowed supporting Marine units to move in and eliminate the remaining members of both teams. The success of this engagement marked a turning point in the broader tactical situation. For the first time since the siege began, Marine units were able to advance through areas that had been controlled by enemy snipers for months. The psychological dominance that the insurgent marksmen had maintained was broken, replaced by uncertainty and fear that affected their decision-making and tactical effectiveness. But Elena's most challenging confrontation still lay ahead. Intelligence reports indicated that the remaining 3 enemy snipers had consolidated their position in a fortified complex that offered excellent fields of fire while providing multiple escape routes. These were the most skilled and experienced members of the original team, and they had learned from the mistakes that had cost their comrades their lives. The complex they had chosen for their final stand was a former government building that had been reinforced and modified to serve as an almost impregnable sniper position. Multiple firing ports offered overlapping coverage of all approach routes, while the building's construction provided protection against anything short of direct artillery strikes. Most importantly, the position allowed the three remaining snipers to provide mutual support while maintaining communication through line-of-sight methods that couldn't be intercepted or disrupted. Elena spent 2 days conducting reconnaissance on this final enemy position, understanding that a direct assault would likely result in her death while failing to eliminate the remaining threats. The enemy snipers had learned from their previous encounters and were no longer making the tactical mistakes that had allowed her to achieve surprise in earlier engagements. The solution Elena developed required her to abandon conventional sniper tactics entirely in favor of an approach that combined elements of urban assault, psychological warfare, and precision marksmanship in ways that her training had never specifically addressed. She would need to get close enough to the enemy position to neutralize their advantages while avoiding the fields of fire that made conventional approaches suicidal. As she prepared for what she knew would be her final engagement with the enemy sniper team, Elena reflected on how much her mission had evolved from its original parameters. What had begun as a reconnaissance assignment had become a personal duel between herself and the most skilled enemy marksman she had ever encountered. The outcome would determine not just tactical success, but the broader question of whether individual skill and determination could prevail against superior numbers and advantageous positioning. The city of Fallujah had become a chessboard where every move carried mortal consequences, and Elena Rodriguez was preparing to make the moves that would determine whether she would emerge victorious or join the growing list of Marines who had fallen to invisible enemies. The final phase of her mission would test every aspect of her training, experience, and personal courage in ways that would define her legacy as a warrior. The final confrontation began at midnight on a moonless night when visibility was reduced to mere meters and every sound echoed through the empty streets like gunshots. Elena approached the fortified government building where the last 3 enemy snipers had established their stronghold, carrying equipment that reflected her decision to abandon conventional sniper tactics in favor of close-quarters combat techniques that would nullify their positional advantages. Instead of her usual long-range rifle, Elena carried a shorter carbine configured for urban warfare, supplemented by specialized ammunition and equipment designed for breaching fortified positions. She had studied the building's construction and identified structural weaknesses that could be exploited if she could get close enough without being detected by the enemy overwatch positions. The approach route Elena had selected took her through a network of drainage tunnels that connected to the building's basement level. These tunnels had been mapped during earlier Marine reconnaissance, but had been considered too dangerous for conventional assault because they offered no escape routes if the enemy detected an intrusion. For Elena's purposes, this disadvantage became an advantage because the enemy snipers wouldn't expect an attack from a direction that violated basic tactical principles. Moving through the drainage system required Elena to crawl through spaces barely wide enough for her body while carrying enough equipment to complete her mission. The tunnels were filled with debris and standing water that made silent movement nearly impossible, but Elena had trained for exactly these conditions during urban warfare exercises that prepared Marines for the worst-case scenarios they might encounter in hostile territory. Reaching the building's basement level required Elena to navigate past improvised explosive devices that the enemy had placed to prevent exactly the kind of infiltration she was attempting. These devices were sophisticated and well-concealed, but Elena's training in explosive ordnance recognition allowed her to identify and bypass them without triggering the alarm systems that would have alerted the enemy snipers to her presence. Once inside the building, Elena found herself in a maze of corridors and rooms that had been modified to create a fortress within a fortress. The enemy snipers had blocked most access routes while creating firing positions that allowed them to cover all conventional approaches. Moving through this environment required Elena to think like an insurgent rather than a conventional Marine, using stealth and misdirection rather than superior firepower. The first enemy sniper Elena encountered was positioned to cover the main stairwell that provided access to the upper floors where the primary firing positions were located. He was alert and well-positioned, but his attention was focused on external threats rather than the possibility of an attack from within the building itself. Elena's approach from the basement level placed her in a position where she could eliminate him before he could raise an alarm or return effective fire. The elimination of the first sniper was accomplished using techniques that emphasize silence and speed over precision marksmanship. Elena used close-quarters combat methods that left no opportunity for the enemy to communicate with his remaining teammates or trigger defensive measures that might compromise her continuing mission. The entire engagement lasted less than 10 seconds and left no evidence that would alert the other enemy snipers to the threat moving through their stronghold. Eliminating the second sniper required Elena to ascend to the building's middle level where firing positions covered the primary approaches that Marine units would use for a conventional assault. This sniper was more cautious than his comrade and had established multiple positions within a single floor, moving between them according to a schedule that made prediction difficult. Elena spent nearly an hour observing his pattern before identifying the moment when he would be most vulnerable to attack. The engagement with the second sniper tested Elena's ability to adapt her tactics in real time as the enemy proved more skilled and alert than his predecessor. When her initial approach was detected, Elena found herself engaged in close-quarters combat within the confines of a destroyed office space where every piece of debris could provide concealment or become a weapon. The fight was brutal and desperate, decided finally by Elena's superior physical conditioning and hand-to-hand combat training. With two enemy snipers eliminated, Elena faced her greatest challenge in the form of the third and most experienced member of the enemy team. This sniper had heard enough of the previous engagements to understand that his position was compromised, and he had established himself in the building's top floor, where he could cover all access routes while maintaining communication with enemy forces outside the building. The final enemy sniper proved to be everything Elena had expected based on months of studying his operational methods. He was patient, disciplined, and skilled enough to recognize that conventional defensive tactics would not be sufficient against the threat Elena represented. Instead of waiting for her to approach his position, he began systematically destroying the building's infrastructure in an attempt to collapse sections that would trap or eliminate her. Elena found herself racing against time as the building began to destabilize around her. The enemy sniper was using demolition charges to bring down support structures, creating a situation where Elena would need to complete her mission before the building became too dangerous to remain inside. This added a time pressure that forced her to take risks that violated every principle of cautious tactical movement. The final approach to the enemy sniper's position required Elena to climb through sections of the building that were actively collapsing while avoiding debris that could crush her or create enough noise to reveal her location. She moved through this environment like a spider, navigating a web that was being destroyed even as she traversed it, using instinct and training to stay ahead of the destruction while closing distance with her final target. The confrontation with the last enemy sniper took place in a room where half the floor had already collapsed and the remaining structure groaned under stresses that threatened to complete the building's destruction at any moment. Both combatants understood that time was running out and that the engagement will be decided by whoever could adapt most quickly to the deteriorating conditions. Elena's final shot was taken while balanced on a beam that was bending under her weight, through smoke and falling debris that made precise aim nearly impossible. The bullet found its target just as the section of floor where the enemy sniper had been positioned gave way completely, sending both his body and his equipment tumbling into the rubble below. With the last enemy sniper eliminated, Elena faced the challenge of escaping from a building that was collapsing around her. The demolition charges set by her final opponent had weakened the structure beyond its ability to support its own weight, and Elena had perhaps minutes before the entire building would come down. Her escape route took her through corridors that were filling with smoke and debris while support columns cracked and failed around her. Elena's emergence from the collapsing building marked the end of a mission that had exceeded every expectation and changed the tactical situation in Fallujah fundamentally. For the first time in months, Marine units could move through the city without the constant threat of invisible snipers who had seemed untouchable and unstoppable. The psychological impact of Elena's success extended far beyond the immediate tactical results, demonstrating that individual skill and determination could prevail against seemingly impossible odds. The aftermath of Elena's mission brought recognition and accolades, but also reflection on the cost of the victory she had achieved. 12 highly skilled enemy snipers had been eliminated, but the process had required Elena to push herself beyond normal human limits and accept risks that would have been considered unacceptable under conventional tactical doctrine. The mission had succeeded, but it had also demonstrated the extreme measures that might be necessary to counter sophisticated and determined adversaries. Elena's debriefing sessions provided valuable intelligence about enemy tactics and capabilities that would influence Marine operations for years to come. Her observations about enemy training, equipment, and coordination methods helped develop new counter-sniper procedures that would be implemented throughout the theater of operations. More importantly, her success proved that individual Marines could achieve tactical results that had previously been considered impossible. The city of Fallujah began to change in the days following Elena's mission. Areas that had been no-go zones for months became accessible to Marine patrols, while civilian populations that had been trapped by sniper fire began to emerge from hiding places where they had sheltered for weeks. The invisible enemy that had terrorized both Marines and civilians had been eliminated through the actions of a single determined warrior who refused to accept that any opponent was truly invincible. Elena Rodriguez returned to routine duties with the knowledge that she had accomplished something extraordinary, but also with the understanding that extraordinary accomplishments often come at extraordinary personal cost. The skills and experiences that had made her successful in hunting the enemy snipers would remain with her for the rest of her life, shaping her perspective on warfare, leadership, and the individual responsibility that comes with exceptional capability. The Marines said the city snipers were invisible, and for months they had been proven correct. But Elena Rodriguez had demonstrated that no enemy remains invisible forever to someone with enough skill, determination, and courage to hunt them down. Her mission had restored hope to a situation that had seemed hopeless and proved that individual excellence could triumph over superior numbers when combined with tactical innovation and unwavering commitment to mission success.